Most people think getting lost in the wilderness means dealing with bears or cold. But what happens when your survival depends on fighting off metallic robots that shoot paralyzing gas? What happens when humanoids spend an entire night trying to drag you from a tree while you fight back with arrows? Today, we're diving into the Cisco Grove encounter, where one man spent 12 hours fighting for his life against beings that defied explanation. This isn't just another UFO story. It's a documented battle for survival, with physical evidence, Air Force investigation, and scars that lasted a lifetime. September 4th, 1964. 28-year-old Donald Shrum headed into the Sierra Nevada mountains for what should have been a routine bow hunting trip. As an aerospace engineer at Aerojet General Corporation, Shrum worked on classified missile defense projects, but hunting offered him an escape from the high-pressure world of military technology. Shrum joined two friends, Vincent Alvarez and Tim Trueblood, for a weekend at Cisco Grove in the Tahoe National Forest. The area was prime hunting territory, dense with pine forests and abundant deer. They'd hunted here before without incident, always staying within shouting distance of each other. But this trip would be different. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Shrum found himself tracking a deer trail that led him further from his companions than intended. The rocky terrain and thick undergrowth created a maze of similar-looking paths. By the time he realized he was genuinely lost, the sun was disappearing behind the western peaks. As an experienced outdoorsman, Shrum knew the dangers. Black bears, mountain lions, and coyotes became active after dark. Getting caught on the ground in unfamiliar territory was asking for trouble. He needed shelter and height. Spotting a sturdy young pine tree, Shrum climbed up with his bow and backpack, preparing for what he expected would be an uncomfortable but uneventful night. He'd rejoin his friends at first light and endure some ribbing about getting lost. As darkness settled over the forest, Shrum noticed a light moving through the trees at low altitude. His heart leapt with relief. It had to be a search helicopter. Without hesitation, he pulled a flare from his pack, lit it, and began waving it to signal his location. The light immediately changed direction, moving toward him with purpose. But as it approached, Shrum realized with growing unease that it wasn't making helicopter sounds. In fact, it wasn't making any sound at all. The object stopped about 50 yards from his tree, hovering silently in the darkness. It was massive, the size of a 14-story building and distinctly cigar-shaped. What he'd mistaken for searchlights were actually 3 oval windows that shimmered like aluminum foil, emitting an eerie glow. Fear replaced relief as Shrum watched the impossible craft hover motionless above the tree line. His aerospace background had exposed him to advanced military technology, but this operated on principles that defied everything he knew about flight and physics. A smaller object emerged from the center window of the larger craft, shooting out into the darkness before settling on a hill roughly half a mile away. The forest fell silent, as if every living creature was holding its breath. Then Shrum heard something that made his blood run cold. Movement through the dense underbrush, getting closer to his tree. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, moving with an unnatural gait that immediately marked them as non-human. 2 appeared to be humanoid beings, about 5 feet tall and dressed in tight-fitting silver uniforms that covered their entire bodies. They wore what looked like welding goggles, giving them an insectoid appearance. The 3rd figure was unmistakably mechanical, a robot with a dark metallic surface, glowing orange eyes like light bulbs screwed into its face, and a hinged jaw that could drop open like an oven door. Its movements were stiff, distinctly non-biological. Without warning, the beings began shaking the tree with tremendous force, trying to dislodge him. Shrum clung desperately to the branches as the entire tree swayed back and forth. These beings possessed strength far beyond what their size suggested. Then the robot opened its hinged mouth and released a stream of white vapor that rose toward Shrum's position. The gas hit him like a physical blow, and consciousness slipped away despite his desperate attempts to hold on. When Shrum regained consciousness, he was still in the tree, but felt violently nauseous. The beings were still below, still trying to shake him loose. In desperation, he began lighting matches and throwing them down. The flames caused them to back away momentarily, but they quickly returned. Fighting through nausea and panic, Shrum managed to knock an arrow in his bow. Years of hunting experience took over despite his shaking hands. He drew back the bowstring, aimed at the robot, and released. The arrow struck with a shower of sparks that confirmed the robot was indeed metallic. The impact caused all three beings to scatter. Quickly, he fired 2 more arrows, each shot causing them to retreat temporarily. But a second robot emerged from the forest and joined the first. Once again, white vapor rose from its mouth, and once again Shrum lost consciousness. When he awakened, the situation had escalated dramatically. The 2 humanoid beings were actually climbing the tree, their long fingers grasping branches as they ascended toward him. In desperation, Shrum began lighting pieces of his clothing and dropping them on the climbers. He threw his baseball cap branches, pine cones, coins, anything he could find to keep them at bay. The assault continued throughout the night. Each time Shrum gained an advantage, the beings adapted their tactics. When fire worked, they waited for him to run out of combustible materials. When physical assault failed, they used paralyzing gas. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was a sustained, coordinated effort to capture him. As the hours dragged by, Shrum's situation became increasingly desperate. He was running out of arrows, out of things to burn, out of energy to fight. His body was exhausted from clinging to branches, his mind reeling from repeated exposure to the alien gas. But still, he fought. The beings seemed equally determined. They worked in shifts, took turns climbing the tree, and varied their attacks to keep him off balance. Their persistence was as frightening as their technology. As dawn approached, more beings arrived. The forest floor beneath his tree became crowded with figures, more humanoids, additional robots, entities whose exact nature he couldn't determine in the dim light. A large volume of smoke began rising from their ranks, thicker and more potent than anything he'd experienced. This final assault overwhelmed Shrum's defenses completely. The gas enveloped his tree, and consciousness fled more completely than before. When he finally awakened, the sun was rising through the forest canopy, and he was alone. Shrum found himself hanging precariously from the tree, supported only by his belt, which had somehow become tangled in the branches. His body was scratched and exhausted, his clothing torn. The forest floor showed signs of struggle, disturbed earth, scattered arrows, remnants of his improvised weapons. Most unsettling, Shrum had no clear memory of how the encounter had ended. Had the beings simply left at dawn? Had something driven them away? The missing time would haunt him almost as much as the memories of the battle. With tremendous effort, Shrum untangled himself and climbed down. The trek back to camp was a blur of exhaustion and disorientation. When he finally stumbled into camp, his appearance told its own story, scratched, dirty, and clearly traumatized. When Shrum told his story, he discovered that Vincent Alvarez had witnessed part of the encounter. Alvarez had seen the strange glowing craft moving over the forest, providing crucial corroboration for Shrum's account. However, going public presented challenges. As an aerospace worker with security clearance, Shrum knew his career could be jeopardized by association with UFO reports. Despite these concerns, he felt compelled to report his experience to the Air Force. 2 Air Force officers interviewed Shrum in detail, examining the arrows he'd recovered from the forest floor. They paid particular attention to one that appeared bent and damaged from impact with a hard surface. They asked detailed questions about the being's appearance and the timeline of events. Then they confiscated several of his arrows, claiming they would be sent for analysis. Later, rumors suggested these arrows contained unidentifiable metallic shavings, though no official confirmation was ever released. Most disturbing, the officers concluded by suggesting that Shrum's memories might not be accurate. They presented alternative scenarios. Perhaps he'd been pranked by teenagers, perhaps he'd suffered a medical episode. They seemed to be offering him an opportunity to recant his story. Faced with potential career destruction and official skepticism, Shrum eventually agreed that he wasn't certain of what he'd seen, but privately, he never wavered from his original account. The encounter left lasting scars. Shrum suffered from severe nightmares for years. He never went bow hunting again, abandoning a lifelong passion. His wife reported that he would sometimes wake convinced he could hear the buzzing sound that had preceded the being's appearance. The case eventually attracted civilian UFO researchers, who found several compelling aspects. Shrum had initially been reluctant to go public, hardly the behavior of someone seeking attention. He'd turned down opportunities to profit from his story. Most importantly, his account remained consistent through decades of questioning. The case represented something rare in UFO literature, a reported encounter where the witness fought back. Most abduction accounts describe passive victims. Shrum's experience was different. He'd resisted, fought, and apparently succeeded in avoiding capture. Skeptics offered alternative explanations. Some suggested a psychological breakdown triggered by being lost. Others proposed encounters with classified military testing. A few researchers suggested accidental ingestion of psychoactive substances, but none adequately addressed all aspects of the case. A psychological break might explain hallucinations, but not physical evidence. Military testing might account for advanced technology, but not the specific appearance and behavior of the entities. The Cisco Grove encounter remains one of the most detailed and disturbing accounts in UFO literature. For Donald Shrum, the experience transformed him from a confident aerospace engineer into a man haunted by memories of a night when humanity's most primitive weapons were all that stood between him and an unknown fate. Whether his account represents genuine contact with extraterrestrial intelligence or something else entirely, it stands as a testament to human resilience in the face of the unknown. Armed with nothing more than a bow and arrows, Donald Shrum held his ground against entities whose capabilities suggested they had traveled between the stars. In the dark forests of California, questions remain that may never be answered, echoing through the trees like whispers of a night when the impossible became terrifyingly real. If you're finding these stories as fascinating and disturbing as we are, please hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible UFO encounters, and share this video with anyone who thinks they know what's really out there in the wilderness. Your support helps us bring you more of these documented cases that challenge everything we think we know about our world. Disclaimer: this video is based on public reports, eyewitness testimonies, and speculative analysis. Some details remain unverified. All interpretations are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only.